continue with The Speckled People by Hugo Hamilton, in one of the finest memoirs to have emerged from Ireland in many years. The acclaimed novelist Hugo Hamilton brings alive his German-Irish childhood in the 1950s Dublin, between his father's Irish strict nationalism and the softly spoken story of his mother's German past. This little boy tells the tale of a whole family's homesickness for a country and a language they can call their own. So this is part 2. I know they don't want us here. From the window of my mother and father's bedroom, I can see them walking by, going from the football field around by our street and down to the shops again. They carry sticks and smoke cigarette butts and spit on the ground. I hear them laughing, and it's only a matter of time before we have to go out there, and they'll be waiting. They'll find out who we are. They'll tell us to go back to where we come from. My father says we have nothing to worry about because we are the new Irish, partly from Ireland and partly from somewhere else, half Irish and half German. We are the speckled people, he says, the black people. Which is a word that comes from the Irish language, from the Gaelic, as they sometimes call it. My father was a school teacher once before he became an engineer. And breck is a word, he explains, that the Irish people brought with them when they were crossing over into the English language. It means speckled, dappled, flecked, spotted, coloured. A trout is brack, and so is a speckled horse. A barn brack is a loaf of bread with raisins in it, and was borrowed from the Irish words bear and break. So we're the speckled Irish, the brack Irish, brack homemade Irish bread with German raisins. But I know it also means we are marked. It means we are aliens and will never be Irish enough, even though we speak the Irish language. And my father says we're more Irish than the Irish themselves. We have speckled faces, so it's best to stay inside, where they can't get us. Inside we can be ourselves. I look out the window and see the light changing on the red brick terrace across the street. I see the railings and the striped canvas sun curtains hanging out over the front doors. There's a gardener clipping a hedge, and I hear the sound of his shears in English, because everything out there is spoken in English. Out there is different, a different country far away. There's a cloud moving over the street, and I can see the gardener looking up. I hear my mother behind me saying that there's something strange about the light this afternoon. She says the sun is eclipsed by the cloud and throws a kind of low lantern light across the red brick walls, and it feels like the end of the day. Falschlich, she calls it, because everything inside our house is spoken in German or in Irish, never in English. She comes to the window to look for herself and says it again, false light. She takes in a deep breath through her teeth, and that means it's going to rain. It means the seagulls will soon come in from the sea and start screeching and settling on the chimneys. It is a sign for people to run out and bring in their washing, a sign for the garden to go inside, because the large drops are already appearing on the pavement. And when all the drops are joined together and the pavement is fully wet, then my mother goes downstairs to the kitchen. She lets us play with some of her things. My older brother Franz, my younger sister Maria, and me examine everything on her dressing table: lipstick, scissors, nail clippers, rosary beads. There's a brush lying on its back with a white comb stuck into it like a saw, a bowl of hair clips and a box of powder, and a gold and blue bottle with the big numbers 4711 written on it. We empty out a box of jewellery and find the emerald snake, which my mother calls the smaragd. Maria keeps calling out the big number 4711 as she blesses herself around the ears and on the wrists and behind the knees again and again and again, just like my mother does, and the whole room fills with the scent of cologne. I look at the print that the hairbrush makes on my arm. France finds the crocodile skin purse with lots of heavy coins inside, and we're rich. The smell of rain and leather are mixed together, all in one with the smell of cologne. In the drawers on each side of the dressing table we find letters, scarves and stockings, passports and photographs, rail tickets, sleeper accommodation on night trains, and then we came across the medals. I knew immediately that they were German medals, because everything that belongs to my mother is German. She tells us lots of stories about Kempen, where she grew up. So I knew that my grandfather, Franz Kaiser, was in the First World War, and that my mother was in the Second World War. I knew that my grandmother, Bertha, was an opera singer, and that my grandfather, Franz, once went to listen to her sing at the State Opera House in Krefeld, and because everyone else was sending her flowers, he decided to send her a bouquet of bananas instead. And that's how they fell in love and got married. Sometimes my mother puts on the radio to see if she can hear some of the songs that her own mother sang. I know how far away Germany is, by the way. My mother sometimes has shadows around her eyes. By the way, she stays silent. Or by the way, she sometimes throws her head back and laughs out loud at some of the things that her father used to do, like the time he once asked to borrow the postman's cap and said, "Thank you," very politely, and then he climbed up the monument in the middle of the square to put it on top of St. George's head. We didn't have to be told that these were military medals which belonged to Franz Kaiser. When he was on duty during the First World War, his wife Bertha brought him his dinner once a day by train in a straw basket. Sometimes she just put the straw basket on the train by itself and it came back empty in the evening. Then he had to go to the front one day and came back with a disease in his lungs that killed him. He was not well even before the war started, and my mother says he should never have been taken into the army because he died when she was only 9 years old. She says she still remembers the smell of the flowers in the room around his coffin and the shadows around her mother's eyes. So I put on Franz Kaiser's medal with the cross and march up and down the bare floorboards of my mother and father's bedroom, looking at myself in the mirror of the dressing table and saluting, while my brother salutes behind me with his own medal and my sister behind him with her emerald snake. Then the sun lit up the street outside, and I thought somebody had switched on a light in the room. The cloud had already passed over and gone somewhere else, and there was steam rising from the pavement. The gardener was back out clipping the hedge, and there was no other sound anywhere except my sister Maria breathing through her mouth, and sometimes the sound of a train in the station. The smell of baking was coming all the way up the stairs from the kitchen, and we should have rushed down to get the leftovers in the bowl. We should have been running up to collect my father from the train, but we were too busy looking through all these old things. At first, There was nothing much in my father's wardrobe, only cufflinks, ties and socks. Then we found a big black and white picture of a sailor. He was dressed in a sailor's uniform with square white lapels over his tunic and a rope lanyard hanging down over his chest. He had soft eyes and I liked the look of him. I wanted to be a sailor, even though I had no idea what this sailor was doing in my father's wardrobe. I know that my father comes from Cork and works as an engineer in Dublin and writes his name in Irish. When he was small, Ireland was still under the British. His father's family were all fishermen. His father fell on deck one day and lost his memory and died not long after that in a hospital in Cork City. But we never talk about that. I knew there would be trouble when my father came home, but I didn't think about it, not even when I saw the shape of his good Sunday suit swinging on the hanger in front of me. Not even when I heard the trains coming into the station, one by one. We continued to inspect everything quickly, pulling out drawers full of handkerchiefs and gloves and mothballs and socks rolled up. There were boxes at the bottom of the wardrobe full of letters and postcards, certificates and holy pictures. And at the last we came across more medals. Heavy bronze medals this time, one for each of us. The medal I put on hung from a striped ribbon that was just like the faded sun curtains across the street. We did not know where these new bronze medals came from, except they must have belonged to the sailor hiding at the back of the wardrobe. Whoever he was, he must have owned the waterproof identity papers too, and the photographs of HMS Nemesis, with sailors lined up in a human chain along the deck. And he must have got all the postcards from King George wishing him a happy and victorious Christmas. Some things are not good to know in Ireland. I had no idea that I had an Irish grandfather who could not even speak Irish. His name was John Hamilton, and he belonged to the Navy, the British Navy, the Royal Navy. He joined up as a boy of 15 and served on all kinds of ships: Defiance, Magnificent, Katoomba, Repulse. He fell on a British naval vessel called HMS Vivid when he was only 28 years of age. He died because he was homesick and lost his memory. But I didn't know any of that. There's a picture in the front room of Franz Kaiser and Berta Kaiser with her head leaning on his shoulder, both of them laughing with a big glass of wine on the table in front of them. There's no picture of John Hamilton or his wife, Mary Frances, alone or together, hanging anywhere in our house. Our German grandparents are dead, but our Irish grandparents are dead and forgotten. I didn't know that my Irish grandfather, John Hamilton, and my German grandfather, Franz Kaiser, must have stood facing each other in the Great War, or that my mother and father were both orphaned by that same war, or that I was wearing the medals of two different empires side by side. I didn't know what questions to ask. I heard the trains coming home one by one, and I knew that we were not allowed to speak the language of the sailor. It is forbidden to speak English in our house. My father wants all Irish people to cross back over into the Irish language, so he made a rule that we can't speak English, because your home is your language, and he wants us to be Irish and not British. My mother doesn't know how to make rules like that because she's German and has nothing against the British. She has her own language and came to Ireland to learn English in the first place. So we're allowed to speak the language of Franz Kaiser, but not the language of John Hamilton. We can speak Irish or German, but English is like a foreign country outside the door. The sailor in the wardrobe, with his short haircut and his soft eyes looking away, was not able to talk to us, even if he was still alive and came to visit us and was ready to tell us all about his travels around the world on those ships, about all the cities and ports he had been to. I could not have asked him any questions. There were so many boxes at the bottom of the wardrobe that we could sit on them and pretend we were on a bus. We called it the number 8 bus, and Franz was the driver, holding a hat for a steering wheel. I was the conductor, bedecked in medals, and Maria was the only passenger, apart from my father's Sunday suit, hanging on the rail, and the quiet sailor in the back seat looking away out of the window. "Hold the bar, please," I called, and Maria got on. She was carrying her crocodile skin purse and paid the fare with the precious coins. "Fares, please," I kept demanding, until she had no money left, and I had to let her on without paying. I rang the bell with my fist against the handle of the drawer, and then I closed the door, and the wardrobe drove off in complete darkness. Maria cried and said she wanted to get off, but it was already too late for that, because the bus was going so fast that it started leaning over, and before we knew it, the whole wardrobe was lying on its side. The only thing stopping it from crashing all the way down to the floor was my mother and father's bed. We didn't even know what happened. All we knew was that we were now trapped inside and unable to open the door. We knew there would be trouble. We were silent for a while, waiting to see what would happen next. Maria kept crying, and then Franz started calling for help. "Matti Mama," he said. I started calling as well. My mother was far away downstairs in the kitchen baking the cake. We called and called and called and waited for a long time, but nobody could hear us, not even the gardener or the neighbours or anyone out on the street, because they could only hear things that were said in English. Nobody even knew that we were calling for help because we had the wrong words. We were the children in the wardrobe, and no matter how loud we shouted they could hear nothing. Some time later, I heard my mother's voice outside saying that she could not believe her eyes. She said she had seen a lot of strange things in Germany during the war, and in Ireland too, after she came over, but never before had she seen a wardrobe on its side crying. She was not able to lift the wardrobe by herself, or to open the door, because it was jammed shut against the bed, but everything was going to be all right in the end. Wardrobe, she said, because even if we had to stay in the dark for a while longer, she would tell us a story until help came. We listened to her and almost fell asleep with the fog of 4, 7-Eleven and mothballs and the cake downstairs, until my father came home and the wardrobe suddenly stood up and the door opened. It was daytime again. I rubbed my eyes and saw my father blinking through his glasses and saying everything with a frown on his forehead. "Who gave you the right to look at my things?" he said, because he didn't want any of us to know that he had a father in the Navy who could not speak Irish, and once stood with the British in a war against the Germans when his own country was still not free. Maria was huddled in my mother's arms, crying even more after she was rescued than before when she was trapped. She said Franz was the driver and I was the conductor, and she was only a passenger like the sailor in the back seat. My father's voice filled the room, and I felt the sting of his hand, but it was nothing because we were all safe again, and my mother was talking about the cake after dinner. The medals were taken off and put away. The picture of the sailor with the soft eyes disappeared, and we never saw him again after that. Nobody mentioned him. I had no way of keeping him in my head because he was gone back into the wardrobe where nobody could rescue him. We didn't know how to remember him, and like him, we lost our memory. That's the end of part 2. So next time it'll be part 3. I hope you enjoyed that. It's a lovely story. For anyone who's mixed with Irish, like my son, he's a mixture of Scottish, Irish and English and what have you. Yeah.